And I think, but the United States systems are tremendously strong. The United States Constitution is extremely strong in terms of how it is protected and projected, whether by the judiciary. They've got a very strong media. They've got a very strong judiciary, and they have huge assets. Whether you take natural resources, technological this thing, and let's not forget, no matter what China has done in the last few years, China is not a global military power. It's a regional military power. The United States is today the only truly global military power. So I think the United States is not in any danger of disintegration. They have tremendous depth in their systems, and they protect them very, very fiercely. So what you're seeing today is a crisis of leadership, and I think that crisis is, and that's also a kind of sense of frustration for the American people, that they have been saddled with this situation. They are saddled with the crisis of leadership. They are saddled with a failure of handling the pandemic. But I think I would put faith in the fundamental systems of the US.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Raju, if you might, yeah, you've already, I think, muted your mic. Anyone else has a question? Just, I think, raise your hands or message me so that I can call you out. I think, Professor Rajveer Sharma, would you have something to say? Professor Sharma, can you hear me? Is the audio clear to everyone? Yeah, Professor Sharma, go ahead.
Sir, it's really a very rich kind of a lecture which Susanna has given. But at the same time, I think 2 or 3 things I would like to get clarified. One, that American foreign policy has undergone a tremendous change under Trump. One, that Trump does not believe much in the UN mechanisms and UN kind of agencies, whether it is IMF or it is WHO or it is the Paris Convention on climate change, or it is withdrawing, as Mr. Serna was saying, that it is rather confining itself to a national role rather than an international role. Number one. Number two, the nationalist agendas are being put more, as were clearly brought out by Mr. Serna on Brexit and other things. Regional kind of political and economic institutions are emerging. Particularly, a reference can be made to BRICS and some other institutions like this, ASEAN and so on. And on the other hand, America is now trying to bring in more people, more countries into G7 also. So now in this post, the foreign policy change of America, what shall be the likely role of India? Number one. Number two, in the post-COVID situation that is emerging, is it desirable for India to make the best use of the tensions that are emerging in and around America? And in fact, as you said, that we should not go too far to be anti-China. Rather, I would say that India should make all-out efforts to weaken China, because China does not spare any opportunity to weaken India. And also, the encirclement of India is deliberate on the part of China. So would you suggest that India should make the best use of the post-COVID situation to weaken China, and in fact, some kind of a containment policy should be adopted by India?
Well, on Professor Sharma, on your first question, I think it's pretty straightforward. We are great believers in multilateral institutions, and we have invested heavily in the UN, etc. Because somehow, it even when we didn't have strength in ourselves as just on our own, we found strength in numbers in these institutions. So I don't think the two things for India are contradictory. For the US, yes. The US, as you said, is walking away from international established institutions, from the liberal order that it has itself created after the Second World War, uh, and is investing more in these plurilateral institutions. Now, for India, I think we have to play both the games. We have to be in whatever plurilateral institution we can get into. And in fact, some which we have helped create, like we had the IBSA, we have BRICS, and we have got into G20. Now, if Trump wants us into G7 and make it G9 or 10, then we are not going to be the ones saying no. So I think we will continue to work on the plurilateral. At the same time, I don't think India can afford to move away from the multilateral institutions, because we need them. We need the presence of those numbers. We need whatever role they give us a much higher platform. For instance, India is going to be the chair of the executive board of the WHO for the next 2 years. Now, that is an extremely important position in this context of the pandemic. So I don't see why India should withdraw from these. So I think, to a brief answer to your first question, is that we should ride both horses. The second point, I did not say that we should not weaken China. What I did say was that there is a diplomatic fine line which has to be played in terms of not being a clear-cut ally or a clear-cut enemy of another country in any setting. And I think what we have done in the Indo-Pacific, the Prime Minister's Shangri-La speech, is a fantastically imaginative kind of vision. And I think we should look at that, because we have said that anybody who plays by the rules of the game is welcome to cooperate in the Indo-Pacific. Now, if China is willing to play by the rules of the game, why would anybody have any objection? The problem is they don't play by the rules of the game. So that rules them out automatically. But, India is not said that. India said that just play by the rules of the game. By observe the international law for sea, for navigation, for airspace, respect sovereignty. This is all mother's milk. So, this is fine. So I wanted to make that nuance clear. Certainly, our interests, whether against any country which harms India, should be protected. We have to seek partners. If India is being threatened by a particular country, obviously we will do everything we can to strengthen our flank and get partnerships. So that is a constant diplomatic game. But I think India has the nimbleness and needs to have the nimbleness and flexibility to continue to maintain good relations with all major powers. Now, this is not always easy, but then that's the challenge. That's the challenge of being India.
Thank you, sir.
I've got a couple of very interesting questions, but sorry, Professor Sharma, do you have a follow-up? Go ahead.
No, sir. In fact, I think I'm very much satisfied for the answer given. But at the same time, there is still some kind of conflicting attitudes and approach between the two countries. India is an anti-racial, nation, while America has been following some kind of a racist policy. That is what is being said by many people. America believes in bilateralism. We believe in multilateralism. And in fact, the kind of the democratic values that we seek to promote, there is a commonality between America and India. But if we go beyond America, our relations with Iran, for example, may be some kind of irritant in strengthening our relationship with USA. So what we have to say on these kind of things?
Absolutely correct. I agree with you on everything. Just as our relationship with Israel is a positive factor for Indo-US relations. Our relationship with Iran is a problem. But that does not mean that India can break its relationship with Iran. What it means is that we have to explain better and more clearer, and we have to become so important for the US that they don't mind our being friends with Iran. So it's the traditional old realpolitik game. We have to be more important. A has to become more important for B, so that B stops worrying about A's relationship with C. It's simply that, and it's a constant treadmill. It can't be done once and forgotten for 10 years. It's a constant treadmill. For instance, they know that we need energy. They know that we depend upon Iran for a large part of our crude resources. They don't like it, but then they like a lot else that they do with India. So then they have to look away. So I think that is ultimately diplomacy. We don't agree on everything with the US. I won't say that they have a racial problem, but look at the racial protests or the anti-racial protests. So they'll handle their protests. They'll handle their problem. We are an inspiration on anti-race. When Martin Luther King was a devotee of Mahatma Gandhi. So we have some things on which we set an example. So I think we don't have an exact match. We are not Siamese twins, but there are commonalities.
Thank you. Professor MP Singh, may I, since you're in the same room, Professor Singh is a great expert in political science and also on Canada. I don't know if you have, Professor Singh, would you like to come in at this point, or do you want to come in later?
In fact, external relations are not my core. That's why I didn't intervene.
No problem. If you feel like coming in later, you're most welcome. Just mention it to me. You can mute your mic for a moment. I have two very interesting questions. One has come from Dr. Alka Tyagi, and she says, what are the reasons that racism is still so strong in the US when, as Mr. Sarna said, US has such strong systems, including legal safeguards against racism, especially after the civil rights movement you mentioned, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And everywhere they have safeguards in place, equal opportunity employment, and etc. So why is it that she's asking, why is it that racism still persists so much in the US?
Not an easy question, but I would simply say that a lot of things exist on paper, a lot of things exist in law. But when it comes to practice, you yourself, you see them being broken. I mean, it's not. I mean, we have problems. We have similar situations on the caste system in our own country. Very often, you have a certain legal situation, but in practice, it works out. So I think this is exactly what you're seeing. You're seeing centuries of discrimination, centuries of bias, which still doesn't die out, despite the laws and despite the situation on paper. So at some levels, it gets ignored, or it's at a very low level of interaction. But when it is taken over and done in a police, takes the form of police brutality, then I think it's difficult to ignore and gives rise to the emotions that you have seen on the streets.
Thank you. The next question comes from Dr. Samson Kamai, who's from Manipur. And it's a very interesting question because he asks, about the cultural relationship between India and the US post-COVID, especially in the context, he says, of the sustenance and growth of Hinduism in the US. So I think that, as I see it, at least there are two dimensions. One is the stated issue of the Hindu component in the Indian diaspora, but the other, I think, the broader issue is, of course, that of soft power. How important is India's soft power going to be in the post-COVID world, especially when it comes to Indo-US ties?
I think, soft power has always played a very big role in Indo-US ties. So, whether you have, I mentioned Mahatma Gandhi, whether you have a Tagore, whether you have early American travelers coming to India, uh, mm, a lot of which, in fact, Makrand, if I remember right, has been detailed in your book on Swami Vivekananda. And you have Swami Vivekananda himself going to Chicago and, the famous, the impact that he had, in not just in that speech, but several other appearances. So I think so soft power has, whether in terms of spirituality, in terms of or dimensions of spirituality, whether you call it yoga or you take religion as a broad subject, but I would say even more. I think in terms of India as a sort of country with another dimension is how Americans see it. And whether you take it down to the level of the Beatles coming to the Maharishi, which also, or you have Ravi Shankar setting the West Coast on fire. So whether it's film or it's music, and then of course now the diaspora has been a major proponent of this soft power. So, in fact, the US is one country in which you don't have to do much to promote Indian culture. It happens on its own, you know. And the only thing is you have to make sure it's the right kind of stuff and good quality stuff.
Indeed. So I'll also invite more questions, a couple more. In the meanwhile, if I might, I want to come back to the neighborhood and ask you a question. All these years when we were tackling, the older Cold War, it was also clear that the Americans and the Pakistanis enjoyed a special relationship. In fact, the paradox of US foreign policy was they were always cozying up to dictators while they were championing democratic values all over the world. Now that has changed, and to some extent, Pakistan has become a client state of China. Uh, and earlier, Professor Sharma mentioned we are being encircled by China. And right now, we see that, the Brick Road initiative is why China wants to pressurize us in, the Pangong Lake area to try to get over to the Karakoram, into Pakistan occupied Kashmir and so forth. So the question is, in our own region and neighborhood, is it possible for India to forge, given the fact that the Pakistan-US relationship has weakened, especially after Clinton too, we saw a definite shift. And Clinton came to India twice. As his first term, he was still very, very friendly. They tried to equalize and balance, but I think there was a definite shift towards India, or at least away from Pakistan. So, is there a way we can reformulate this and maybe have a special arrangement with the US on the one hand, and also obviously with Russia, which remains a player in the region? They're right, beyond Afghanistan. There's still Russia. The great game goes on, though possibly in a more subterraneous and less overt manner. Is there any scope for India to renegotiate alliances so that in our own neighborhood we are not as pressured as we seem to be right now, using the US as a partner?
But I think you're right that for years we suffered from a hyphenation. The US State Department would automatically think in India-Pakistan terms, and very often the Pakistan sort of constituency in the US think tanks or bureaucracy was pretty strong. Uh, I think as the Indo-US relationship's importance grew, this hyphenation broke. And you're right, it was President Clinton, particularly I recall during the Kargil conflict, that this hyphenation was definitely broken because it was realized that here you have a democracy which has acted responsibly. It has not crossed the line of control. It has, at great cost, it has cleared the intruders from its land. And there you had a army, you had coups, you had you know Musharraf taking over from Nawaz Sharif or threatening him, and you had this whole mess, and you had terrorist intrusions. So I think the message that came through was very clear, and the Americans got it. So I think this hyphenation has been broken. What happens is that at certain time, and that's why this is as I said, it's a treadmill or a moving target. You're constantly shooting at it. We can't say that hyphenation is broken forever. It keeps coming back in stray remarks in certain situations. Why? Because very often America sees Pakistan as a tactical instrument for a design it may have, say, in Afghanistan. For instance, the situation in Afghanistan. So, very often, concessions, Pakistan is sort of wrenching away concessions for cooperation in Afghanistan. So, there are these things which have to be, we have to take some of it in our stride. We have to make sure that the broader story on Pakistan, and I must say that in recent years, we have had much more success in projecting India's concerns on terrorism, India's concerns on cross-border terrorism, and the US has realized that the Pakistanis have not been very reliable partners for them, even in situations which are purely of American interest. So I think you're right. We have to do it. We have to be very strong ourselves, and B, we have to make that count with our partners. That listen, these are Indian concerns, and you have to take them on board. And whether it's Russia, and it'll all depend upon the strength of our relationship with a particular country that they will listen to us.
Thank you. There's a question about Joe Biden and what happens if he comes to power, and he's been fairly critical from time to time, of India. And do you think that it'll be difficult for us to recalibrate the relationship, or that actually presidents come and go, but the State Department and our own foreign ministry have a much steadier, pattern, so that it won't make a big difference. So that's the question.
Well, I think let's see what happens. But frankly, I think that again, if it is a democratic president, there would probably be a change of nuance on certain things. But I think the fundamental logic of the relationship nobody can ignore. So I think we'll have to probably adjust our narratives to some extent, and we must remember that with whether you had Clinton or Obama as Democrats, or you had Bush and Trump as Republicans, we've succeeded. So I think we will, with no matter who the president is, but we'll have to change nuance our narratives accordingly, and that happens. That's part of the game.
Very good. We're almost at the end. I have one last question, if you might want to take it. It really has to do with what you said. I think it's really crucial that the world is suffering from a leadership crisis, as you said. And isn't this an area where maybe India has something to offer, not just in terms of its philosophical, cultural, spiritual traditions, the way we understand our relationship with our others, self and other and so forth. But also, I think we have a unique leader today in Prime Minister Modi, and also in the MEA, led by Dr. S. Jaishankar, a career diplomat, a very, very learned, scholarly, quiet, but very effective leader. I think that we've never seen such a close, you might say, coordination and cooperation between, the PMO and the MEA. Often you've seen in the past, our prime ministers themselves have been de facto foreign ministers, right? Going right back to Jawaharlal Nehru, even with Mrs. Indira Gandhi, we had that. But today we have a very, a trained, sort of diplomatic corps, and there's talk of enhancing it. We are short staffed. I think you would know better than anybody else. I think we need to increase our diplomatic footprint given our ambitions in the world. So can we use the quality of leadership that we have today to take the right foot forward, so to speak, in the post-COVID environment?
I think I think there's already a realization of that, and you've touched upon a very important aspect of our post-COVID presentation, if I may call it that, because on the one hand we have to handle the domestic problems that we have. We have to handle the health crisis. We have to get the economy back on its feet. At the same time, this is a tremendous opportunity, and in terms of the role that we can play abroad. We have already seen it. The Prime Minister has spoken, for instance, very early on in this crisis to the SAARC countries. He spoke to the G20. We will be hosting the G20 in a year and a half or so, a couple of years from now. We'll be heading the WHO. And I think in
Council, we are also on the Security Council.
Yes, we are up for that now, for the Security Council, the non-permanent membership of the Security Council. So I think these are places in which we can put forward a fresh agenda, forcefully, effectively, and India's voice counts. And if we have a presentation by the Prime Minister in one of these, or by the Foreign Minister, I think the world is looking for something like that, because, as you say, the US is withdrawing from leadership roles. China, despite its economic clout, somehow doesn't have the moral ground, let me say. So you need, in India, and that's why in one of my earlier responses I said these are platforms, the international institutions for India. So I think we need to be able to take these. We need to be able to get a clear agenda. We need to have a vision and put forward a vision for how this world is going to recover from this. And there are several ways, and we have a lot of talent to back it up.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. We hope to invite you in person, either when the vaccine is made or when things flatten, the curve really flattens. We know that you're our neighbor. You have a home here in Mashobra. And we really, really look forward to your visit in person so that you can come and see the work we do. And we also solicit your continued support, blessings, and good wishes. And thank you again very much for joining us today. I want to end with another quotation from the Zafarnama. I mean, whenever we face bullies, as we do in China, we always should remember that there are powers above, what we see with our naked eye. And I want to go to number 5 of the Zafarnama. Jahan Pak Zabardast Zahir Zahur, Ata Mede Had Hamchu Hazar Hazur. So Guru Gobind Singh Ji says, beyond this world, powerful, he is manifest all around. In the gifts that he bestows, his presence does abound. So today, Mr. Sarna, your presence has really been a gift. I thank you very much, and I hope we can meet soon in person. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Makran. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.